It is. Day 4.
You caught
number 86.
There we go.
With the man, Frank Scalish. We've talked largemouth. We've talked smallmouth. We've talked largemouth and smallmouth. We've talked spotted bass and largemouth. But we haven't really talked straight up spotties. My favorite species, Uncle Frank.
I'm going to agree. Listen, I love smallmouth, but I have a thing for spotted bass. I do.
It's weird to me that some people are not spotted bass fans. How could you not be a spotted bass? It combines the best of every species.
Right. Oh, yeah. And spotted bass are crazy. I mean, they're out of their ever-loving mind. That's why I love fishing for them so much. And when you get a really big spotted bass, that's exciting. I mean, probably I don't get a chance to fish for spots that much. I mean, I do a lot, but I don't. I have to make a conscious effort to go somewhere where they're at. Smallmouth are right in my backyard. I've been catching big smallmouth my whole life. So when I catch a really big spotted bass, I'm like super pumped. Like super pumped.
That's the topic of day 4, number 86 today, spotted bass. First of all, what are you sipping on there, Uncle Frank? You got Hottie Toddy to kick things off for 86?
Yeah, you're not going to believe this. First of all, I got Black Rifle coffee in here.
Oh, you do?
And it's the CAF brand, caffeinated as all get out. And I have a new BTL mug from a fan, and it says it's a Yeti mug. It says BTL on it, and it's got old Uncle Frank on the back. I was really pumped. I didn't realize this was gonna happen, but I got
Kermit's Customs.
Kermit's Customs. I swear, this guy DM'd me, and we went back and forth a couple of times, and lo and behold, I got a surprise in the mail the other day, and this is my new official coffee mug, and no more of that pink Cleveland mug, and no more of my beat up green trashed mug. This is my official,
the real thing, the Yeti,
the real thing, man. I'm actually nervous to bring this in the boat with me. Because I don't want to lose it.
No, you'll be good. So big shout out to Kermit's Customs for hooking Uncle Frank up. A
huge shout out. And Black Rifle Coffee for giving me the shakes this morning.
See, I right there, I got the Black Rifle. Not a sponsor of the show, but they sponsor a lot of people in fishing, have been very supportive of professional fishing and tournament fishing over the last several years. Also employ a lot of veterans, and I believe it is veteran-owned. And there's actually one that's just down the road here in Mourne. Every once in a while I'll roll with Black Rifle.
The irony of it is I never heard of it before, and my son, Noah, was in the Marine Corps. And then Frankie was in the Army, but Noah was in the Marine Corps, and he sent me a bag of CAF from Black Rifle, which is caffeinated as all get out. Yeah. And so we drank it. I liked it, and now that's it. Now we have
history.
We're drinking two kinds. We're drinking CAF and Firefighters.
Like I said, not a sponsor plug. Have nothing to do with that.
No, I just I'm meat and potatoes and everything.
Yeah.
Just meat and potatoes, and to me the perfect cup of coffee is Maxwell House or McDonald's coffee. I hate all other coffees. So the long and short of it is, this is the only
just for the passion. Just hate it. Don't even dislike it. You just
I just don't. I hate it. And so for the record, these are the only. This is the only coffees I drink, and I'm not a coffee snob. I'm just not. But I can't go into a coffee shop and say I want black coffee, and they go, oh, do you want a grande, a latte, a whatever? No,
just want a coffee.
Just black coffee. Just black coffee in a cup. You know what I mean? Anyway,
Yeah.
we digress again as
Yeah.
usual.
Well, let's go. Let's get into, before we get into the spotted bass though.
Yeah.
Last week, recorded show this week. We will be live back next week, day 1 of the Red River for me. Currently, as this show airs on BTL and the podcast platforms. But last week you were talking about the fall in love with fishing specials that were over on lurenet.com, primarily walleye last week.
Well, and square bills
And square bills.
So here's what we got. Every week is going to be different lures at 50% off. But what's going to remain all month is 20% off the 6-pack bundles. So if you got, Mobster Swim Jig 6-pack bundle, 20% off. Whatever bundles are offered, 20% off. Now, unfortunately, the 20% off does not include the new canary color that Normans are in, but they're relatively inexpensive, and especially in today's world. So you got to check out the new Norman canary colors. It's not a new color; it's a bring back. As I said last week, some colors should never go away, and this was one of them. So now it's back, and it's a LureNet exclusive. But we did do a limited run on them to start, so they will run out.
I meant to ask you this last week, and I didn't, because you talked a lot about the canary color, why it works, how it blends in, great for smallmouth and largemouth. Why do some colors go away, especially popular colors? We seem to see that across brands. What is the reasoning behind that? Why do some colors that people really like, who's making that decision going, man, I know this is a jammer color, but we're just sick of painting it?
Well, it's not that. What happens is sometimes colors wane. They fall out of favor. Even though they're fantastic colors, new colors are constantly being created, obviously. And new colors have a tendency to trend. Worse than the old colors get flat, and some lure companies have a threshold. If we don't sell X amount, we have to discontinue it.
So I see what you're saying.
So it's all based on a threshold, and unfortunately, a lure company can't keep every single color in stock that's ever been made.
I don't know. Have you ever seen the RoboWorm selection?
Too much inventory. Yeah, exactly. It's just too much inventory to handle. So they have to have some formula. Now, sometimes good colors get caught up in the mix. Okay, like here, look, chartreuse and blue should never go away. Lavender shad, never go away. You know what I mean? But sometimes they get caught up in the mix, and so we have the opportunity to bring back some of these colors, then get a resurgence on them, and then put them back in the line. So that's kind of how it works on the color schemes. But we can't forget the fall in love with fishing sale, because this week, now you got to get ready for this, because this week is bass fishing week. Spinner baits, buzz baits, top waters, all on sale, 15% off. So you gotta check it out. Now,
the week of the 22nd.
Right. Now, next week is kind of cool too, because now next week they're going to start transitioning into the wintertime baits. So next week's going to be swim jigs and swim baits.
So that's the week of the 29th.
Yeah, 29th through the 5th will be swim jigs and swim baits. And then, of course, Matt, you're going to love this. Once we get to the first week in October 6th through the 12th, it's crappie time.
Nice.
Crappie jigs, crappie plastics, crappie crankbaits, all that stuff will be blown out at 15%.
Speaking of crappie, I would like to mention really quick, selfishly, well, not selfishly, it's kind of a donation deal. Matt Looney, who we had on the show last week, talked a little bit about it, does a non-profit organization called Bass for Beckers. He's got a 8-year-old nephew, and every year for the last 4 years, he's done $25 raffle tickets to give away his Skeeter. This year, I believe it's an FXR at the end, and they've raised over like $100,000 each year through this for that charity for Beckers. And this month, September, through September, if you go to the bass4beckers.com and buy a ticket, you are not only eligible for the giveaway at the end of the year for the boat, but also a drawing at the end of the month for a winter crappie trip with me.
Oh, sweet.
In Oklahoma.
So you could for $20 you could win a
25.
bass boat. $25
You could get to
win a
go,
bass boat.
yes, and supplementally go fishing with me too. So if you could, but if you win the random drawing this month for September, if you buy a ticket in December, like it was like Fish with Polinick 1 month. Like, I mean,
cool.
It goes down. Give away like a graph 1 month. So the September one is a winter crappie trip with me somewhere in Oklahoma. I can't say the names of the lake. It's kind of like your Ohio lakes. You don't just go blurting them out, right?
No, you can't do that.
But I'll like fillet them, clean them, vacuum pack them. You get to go home as long as they're under 2 pounds.
I want to go.
So anyway, that's the crappie thing. But you can go on. Then you said that week of October, it's a crappie deal.
Right, October 6th through the 12th, it's all crappie. The 29th of September through October 5th, swim jig, swim baits, and of course this week. Spinner baits, buzz baits, top waters, 15% off, lurenet.com.
I can't get over every time you take a sip of that coffee. It's such a flex.
I am
with the BTL logo on it.
I am so happy you don't even know. And this coffee is like liquid lava.
That's fantastic. All right, are we ready to dive into the world of the mystical and quirky? Quirky is a good way to describe a spotted bass. Would you not say quirky?
I will say quirky, aggressive. I absolutely love these fish beyond belief. Let me see. I have
characterized by peculiar or unexpected traits. Quirky.
Quirky. They are a quirky bass. I almost dropped these. I'm leaving. I'm leaving.
All right, have at it, Uncle Frank. The floor is yours.
The floor is mine. I almost dropped everything on my desk on the floor, to be honest with you.
I'm putting you big screen. Teach us about the spotted bass. Set the scene for us. Wait. We got a lot to cover here.
We have a lot to cover. And quite frankly, what we're going to do is we're going to go through fall through winter. I'm going to touch on key elements to look for, fall through winter, things you should never overlook, things you should look for. I'm even going to go through lure choices. I'll keep the lure choices kind of broad. We won't do a deep dive into every single bait you can use. Mostly it's going to be about location and what to look for and how to catch them, basically.
Okay.
All right. So let's talk. I'll say now what's going on right now is and you guys got to reference the blueback herring show, the gizzard shad show, and the threadfin show. Reference those shows. I'm gonna talk about these bait fish, but I'm not going into detail on them. I'm just gonna mention them, and so if you need more detail, go back and look at those shows. So here it is. So right now, this time of year, and maybe more in a few weeks, but you're going to start to see schooling activity. All right, the bass are going to start busting on shad. You're going to see the birds running around, and of course the stripers are going to start busting on them too. But for the most part, the spotted bass do the exact same thing. Now you'll know that from from previous shows, the bluebacks are starting to make their migration. Gizzard shad are, and so are threadfin. So all the baits starting to get together, and the bait's starting to school up, and the bass are taking advantage of this schooling activity. But here's the crazy thing, because I hear this all the time. People will say, oh, they were busting over there, and then they were busting over there, and then in the morning I couldn't find them busting anymore. You know what I mean? Well, schooling activity is really not random. It appears to be random to the casual observer, but it's not really random. So here's what we're going to look at. Like in late summer, what I do is I'll look at main lake, high spots, long points that go way out into the lake, shoals, look for creek channels, the really defined creek channels, because they'll suspend over them. And then they're going to always relate to structure. Here's the crazy thing. They always relate to structure, but they're going to be way above it. In other words, there might be a high spot in 28 feet of water, and those shad will be above that structure. Okay. So now you could see how the randomness comes out of it.
Relating to structure, but not on it.
They're right. They're relating to structure.
It's like if you ever have been to the Bass Pro Shops or the Cabela's tank and you see there's a rock down there, or if you go to the state fair and they have it, you will often see fish that are relating to the one tree in the tank, but are way above the tree just under the surface.
Perfect analogy. It's perfect. So they're going to relate to these structural elements. Now, remember, from the bait fish shows we did, these bait fish are starting to migrate towards the creeks and towards big, long pockets. Okay. So they're making their movement, but they don't go one at a time. They'll go in mass. They'll school up and they'll start traveling through the system and go in mass. Something that I look for, especially this time of year, well, I'll look for this stuff all year, but especially this time of year. And as we get closer to winter, it gets even more prevalent. I call them runoff fishers. They're places in the lake that only have water flow during or after heavy rainfall. And you see it. I've seen it on Smith Lake a million times, where water's pouring over the mountainside and coming into the lake. Oh, on any other given day, there would be no flow there. So I call them fishers. These things here, and I might actually have an illustration of it. I do. I know I do, because I did it. So these things are, can you guys see it? Because
looks fantastic. Looks fantastic.
So these things are fishers. So the rain comes, the water plows through these cracks, these small cracks.
That's the bank. That's like
this is the bank where the water meets the bank. This is the ridge, or the bluff, or a ridge. This is the water flow. It flows in through here. It's going to blow out in here. It's going to create eddies and current. Okay. The tricky part about this is you want to always look for these when it rains, but you have to still be near the bait fish, because what happens is when that water starts blowing out of here, all the bait fish that are in the vicinity, they all run in here. They all run up to this running water, and the bass follow them. The spotted bass follow them. Now, I've had some remarkable days just targeting those, and traditional lures play here. Okay. Shaky heads, spinner baits, they play in those situations. Just typical, normal, everyday spotted bass lures that you throw play, even drop shots and everything. So I always look for fishers, especially during the rain or right after the rain.
Opportunistic, though. Like, it's not like 4 days before a tournament. What you have to do is know where they are, maybe pre-scout them if you know weather is coming in.
Right.
And then the day that you're fishing, start running them.
Right.
And see if there's run-in.
Right. And I'll tell you, they're the easiest things in the world to find if you use your eyes. Because here's what happens. You look at the terrain. You see the terrain make a ditch. Okay, like a little valley. Run the boat over, look at it. If it's clear of leaves and debris, okay, it's getting runoff, because it pushes everything off the rock bed that's on the rock bed. It pushes everything off, and you'll literally see debris piled up like leaves and whatever on the sides, and that one drain will be clean. It'll be like somebody raked it out and cleaned it. There won't be garbage in it. Okay. Now, the other thing about these fishers that you got to realize is that stuff comes out of them and goes into the lake. So usually below these things, you might have branches and brush and stuff like that. because it gets shoved down there in the heavy rainfall and goes in there. And then look at the bank too, because if you see fallen trees on the bank or broken trees on the bank, you can bet your bottom dollar that the rest of that tree is somewhere in the water over there. So you could use your eyes, and you can really figure this out. So on these choices for, let's say, this starting stage, okay, we're going to call this the starting stage of fall, where everything's starting to move, everything's starting to bunch up, they're starting to school. The lure choices, there's quite a few, okay, but because you can't ever get rid of traditional spotted bass stuff like shaky heads and drop shots, jig worms. You can't ever get rid of, and jigs, of course. You can't ever really get rid of that stuff because this is way too early in the season to start narrowing that down. So top water choices for me are pretty simple. I'm going with Spook Juniors, and now because the little boyo came out, now the little boyo, because that's a bite-sized nugget for a spotted bass. Okay, so, and then of course I'm going to throw swim baits on jig heads like the Scottsboro swim bait, right here. You guys are familiar with the Scottsboro swim bait. And there's a new bait out now. It's called the FF Minnow, the FF Sonar Minnow. This
The
thing's
Christie minnow that he won the classic on.
Yeah, this is bad to the bone, dude, and this is bad to the bone on smallmouth too. Okay, this is Tennessee shad. I mean, this is essentially a lot. Look at that. This is alive. Okay, this is one of the best bait fish imitators I've ever seen. Now this one's called Tennessee shad, but I'll tell you right now, this is emerald shiner on Lake Erie all day long. Like this is money. Okay, so this is actually one of my favorite colors. Then another color that I like, especially for spots in the shaddy type lakes, this is actually called goby. But if you look at this bait, it's got blue pearl in it and purple metal flake in it. If I can get it to flash.
No, it's flashing.
Okay, and purple metal flake. This is a great shad imitator. It's got more of a solid belly, more of a little transparent gray back. This is a money color, especially if the water's clean. And then the go-to color is basically, it's just pearl. I'm trying to get it to there you go.
There it is.
Look at that. Look how beautiful that is, right? Now the pearl one's nice because you could doctor this up with a Sharpie or a highlighter pen. You can doctor this up, and you can add a touch of color in it, whatever you want, or fish it as is. I mean, this is a dynamic color also right here. So that's jig head stuff. Okay, jig head swim baits, jig head forward facing minnows. And then, of course, underspins play. Underspins, in my opinion, always play on a spotted bass lake. Because if they're suspending on my 2D sonar, when I see them directly under the boat, I drop a spoon on them, or I'll drop an underspin right on their head, or I'll drop a drop shot straight down on them. I stop it about 2 feet above them, and in 1 nanosecond that they're active, because your bait will start to go down and they'll start to come up for it. It's video game fishing at its finest. Now, a bait that I think is probably overlooked a lot these days because of everything new that's coming into the marketplace are spinner baits. Windy points and rain, that spinner bait can be fantastic. I've had days on spotted bass where the spinner bait was money, and I'm burning it over points, windy points, and I'm keeping it 3 feet underneath the surface. I can see the blades flashing all the way to the boat, and then boosh, and these fish are coming up from 10 to 12 feet away from it to get it. So that spinner bait can never be overlooked from now until winter, because if the conditions are right, you can't beat it. You just can't beat it. And then one thing I'm going to say, I'm going to talk about a lot of things, and I'm going to reiterate this 1,000 times before this show is over. You never, never, never overlook brush piles in a spotted bass lake. Ever. I don't care what time of year it is. Matt's laughing at me. Don't laugh.
They relate to the brush.
Oh, they are
365.
they are on it. They are absolutely on it. I've never seen any fish as predictable in my life as spotted bass and brush piles. That is just
Now,
the
the
way it
problem
goes.
sometimes you run into, especially on a spotted bass fishery, is once you hook said spotted bass off brush pile, they tend to want to see where their friend went. And it may take
Yes,
them 5 to 10 minutes to get back to the brush pile.
exactly. And you'll know. But I can tell you a trick for that, guys.
Okay, I didn't want to get ahead of the show here.
Actually, I wasn't going to mention it, but now that you brought it up, I'm going to mention it. Whenever I'm brush pile fishing for spotted bass, I've always got a crankbait tied on, usually a deep little end. Um, if I land a spot from a brush pile and I see 3 or 4 coming up with them, I start chucking the deep little end out there, even though I know it's probably not going to get deep enough to get to that brush pile. I catch those bass as they're starting to regroup to go back down to that brush pile, so I can immediately catch another fish. Now, probably when you hook that fish, you're either going to bring the rest of them up with you or the rest of them are going to go back down. But you're going to catch another one almost immediately. If you see them come up, get that one in the boat as fast as you can, fire that crankbait out there, and you're going to catch one almost instantly. So that's a trick. There you go. We did a trick already. We did one trick, and we're not even halfway through this thing.
I like it.
Okay, so now that's from now until later in the fall. So now now the water's actually noticeably starting to cool. Okay. Your weather temperatures are, my cat's outside trying to get in.
You can let him in if you want to let him in.
No,
We've had the story of the cat. I mean, this is the rescue cat that you found at the tournament. That
yeah,
you
that's
kept in
exactly
the hotel room that
exactly.
you brought back. I mean,
exactly.
if he's allowed in, you're more than welcome to let him in, Uncle Frank.
Oh, he's allowed in. She's allowed in. So what happened was, this has nothing to do with spotted bass. So what happened was, one day I let her out. We got some storms coming in. She jumped up and climbed up on the roof. Okay, so I'm on the second floor of the house. She climbs up to the second floor roof, and then she can't get back to the tree to get back down, and she started scratching at the window. So I said, well, I'll let her in. It's raining out and she's afraid of thunder. So I let her in, and now she thinks it's another freaking way in the house. So now every time I let her out and she wants to come in, she runs to the daggone window and does her thing on the window. Anyway,
you have no idea how funny I think it is that both you and Jeffries are cat people.
Well, I became a cat guy because of my travels. When I traveled all the time, I couldn't have a dog because I could never find someone to take care of it, and it's a lot of trouble. But with a cat, you could put 50 pounds of cat food in a bowl and 20 gallons of water in bowls on the floor, and the cat will take care of itself. Where a dog, if you put 50 pounds of cat or dog food in a bowl, the dog will eat every ounce of it the first time he goes to the bowl, puke it all up, and you know what I mean? And that's how dogs are. So anyway, that's how I became a cat guy.
Back to spotted bass.
Yeah, let's go back, please. So, okay. So the water's starting to cool. The days are getting much shorter. You're pretty much out of shorts for the most part. You're in long sleeve shirts and pants. It's not frigid yet. It's not full blown winter. It's just, it's fall. It's hunting season. Okay, so now the spots are really moving with the bait. The bait's really moving. The spots are really moving. Remember, go back and watch the blueback show, threadfin show, gizzard shad show. They're all moving towards the creeks now, and they're moving there with a purpose. Okay, so now we're focusing on or near creek mouths, and we're still looking at structure, but we're changing up a little tiny bit of what we're looking for. So now bluffs, bluff ends, short, deep pockets, where there's shortcuts and they're super steep, maybe in the beginning of a creek mouth or right in front of a creek mouth. Now we're starting to look at that stuff, but we're also not going to overlook shallow or high spots or bars. Again, in or near creek mouths where that bars come up fairly close to the surface. Wind is good on those shallow bars, and we're talking about first quarter of the creek at this point in time, maybe a little less. We're not quite getting a third of the way back or half of the way back. We're still in the beginning of this, so we're still covering some main lake, but we're focusing more towards the creek mouths. Okay, again, runoff areas. This is fabulous for runoff areas. So when I talk about bluffs, I always say bluff ends. I say it a million times. Bluff ends, bluff ends, bluff ends. The bluff ends are critical. But the other critical thing that's often overlooked is what's going on the bluff itself. I have a spot on Table Rock that essentially, if you look at it, it's just a bluff, bluff wall forever. Okay. There's one section on this bluff wall where it has a flat that comes out and then it drops off. So it's if you hit that bluff wall before the flat, it's like 40 feet deep. You get to the flat's like 15 feet deep and it comes out about 25 yards and then drops down. Okay. So I look for irregularities on straight bluff walls because these are often overlooked areas and high percentage spots. Okay. So the other thing you look for on a bluff wall is cave ins where you see debris that fell over and it makes like a gravel point that falls into the water, or you look for cracks, fissure cracks to be more specific, where the rainfall comes in and pummels the water down. So if we're going to talk bluff ends, okay, am I on the screen?
You are on.
This is the bluff end, okay?
Yep.
This is the bluff. This is the bluff end, all right? So you want to concentrate on the bluff ends, very important. And then, of course, if you have a crack or a fissure in the bluff wall, you look at that stuff. That's obviously a high percentage spot. Now, I told you earlier, look for what's going on the bank. If you've got fallen trees and stuff, you have to start looking in. Now, this could be 150 yards long. I just shortened it up. So if you see fallen trees, you got to go look at that because dollars to a donut, there's trees underwater here.
It's like a brush pile. What did we just say about brush piles?
Exactly, 100%. And of course, irregularities in that bluff where you got a crack or a fissure that comes in. Very important. That's a very important structural element in the world of spotted bass fishing. And it plays very important role in the fall, later in the fall, and in the spring, like before the fish start to go to true pre-spawn areas. I've done very well fishing that way, especially on, lakes like Smith Lake and stuff like that, where you have tons of this stuff. The key is finding the right bluffs at the right time of year. And it's kind of similar because you're talking about late fall, the fish are going to the creeks. You're talking about early spring before pre-spawn, they're going to the creeks. So it's very similar. It's very similar. So again, I'm going to say this again, a note, never overlook deep docks and never overlook brush piles. Spots love to suspend around this stuff. So lure choices, we're going to have a lot of overlap, so I'm not going to really go into the overlap stuff so much, but the lure choices for the most part are going to be very similar. Now I'm going to start to put in suspending jerk baits, crank baits, of course, shaky heads, and then I'm going to start at this point in time. I like swim jigs, okay? I don't fish the swim jig traditional style. I slow roll them like if I was fishing a Flash Mob Junior. That's how I fish my swim jig. So this again, it's the Mobster swim jig. This skirt color is called the Numbers. It's got mouse on the back, a little bit of blue glimmer, little bit of white.
You're fishing it like a swim bait. It's just a bulkier swim bait.
That's all I'm doing, and I'm slow rolling it. So here's what I got to do. You have to pay attention to how deep the bait is or how deep the bass are, because you don't want to be below them. Okay. the aggressiveness of the bass, they'll let you know how high above them you could be and still get a strike. If you're 6 feet over their head and they're not coming for it, you got to slow it down. You got to get it down deeper. Okay, so that's the whole trick with the swim jig. This is one of my favorite ways to fish a swim jig, and for the most part, that's how I'm fishing them for the most part. And then, of course, you got your swim baits with jig heads and your underspins and everything else. Now, here's a note. I'll fish this on shallow structure also. Yeah, that's pretty sweet right there, dude.
That's what a runoff looks like also, just in case you were
correct.
wondering.
That's a big runoff.
That's a large runoff, but
that's a good one.
Gives you a visual of what Frank is talking about.
And if you see where the white waters are on here, they'll be, when that rain stops and those quit running, there'll be no leaves on that where that white water is. No leaves, no debris, and you'll know it's an active one. You'll know that gets going when it rains. Now that's really a large one. Most of the ones that I find are, they're small, 10 feet wide to a foot wide. They're small, but they'll pump water into the system. So basically the swim jig, count it down. Same thing you would do if you were throwing a swim bait on a jig head.
Okay.
Just count it down. Make sure you're above the bass. If you go below the bass, they're more likely than not, they don't go down to get them. If a fish is suspending, as you know from previous shows and a million conversations, they feed up. Suspending bass feed up. That's just the nature of the animal, and that's what they're doing there, and that's what they're looking for. So really, it's pretty simple up until the cold winter. Okay, the cold water period is what I'll call it. Now, the cold water period, we'll just jump right into it. The cold water period, it can be tricky. And the only reason it can be tricky is because you have to pay attention to a few things here, okay? If the creeks are clean and clear, the bluebacks and the threadfin will be up them, all right? Mm-hmm. You know that from the blueback show, blueback herring cannot tolerate sediment-filled water and dirty water. They cannot survive in them, okay? And threadfin hate it. So if you go to a longer pocket and you run to the back of that thing and you see a mud line or a dirty water line, you don't need to go any farther back. If the lake's got threadfins and bluebacks on it, you don't need to go farther back because all those fish are following that mud line out, which actually makes the bass more predictable because they're going to stay with those fish. Okay, so as the mud line comes down and all the bait that was way up in the back start to come out, you're going to have this massive concentration of bait in a small area, and the bass will be with them. So that kind of makes things predictable. Mm-hmm. It's very important to know the dominant species of forage in your lake. It's very important because if the dominant baitfish species is gizzard shad, they'll be all the way up in the mud as far back as they can go because that's what they groove on. They like that, and they can survive in it. So you have to know what the prevalent baitfish is in your body of water, or you're going to get, you could be wrong, mm-hmm. In your assessment. So that's just a side note. I'm watching this cat. It's crazy. That's a side note. So
go let him in. He's freaking out.
All right. Can you hold the phone for a second?
Yeah, we got it. We'll put it on. We could get some elevator music going while Frank gets the cat in the house.
Hold on.
Uncle Frank has now left the studio to let the cat in through the window. Like I said, still drives me nuts that both Jeffries and Uncle Frank are cat fanatics. Just seen the windows open. The cat now seems to realize that it has options. Just because it can't come in, he's back. What is the phrase? Happy cat, happy life. There he is.
Look at that, dude.
There he is, right there. Look at the little mitten paws. I didn't notice that last time.
Look at that. I'm showing her off. Look at how.
What's her name?
Bama.
Bama. Because you got her in Alabama.
Yeah,
that's a good.
All right, get out of here. Okay, so where was I? I was in the bait.
You're talking about the bait fish forage, threadfin, bluebacks. Don't like the mud. If a mud line's going, you don't have to go past it. It kind of herds the fish closer.
Right.
If you have gizzards, that kind of changes things. They will get right up in the mud. The fish will follow them up there.
I'm back. Okay, so now here's what we're going to look for, okay? We're going to look for, again, short, steep pockets or guts. The bass can suspend right over the middle of the creek channel in these things, and they often do, right, like literally right over the middle.
Like over 50 foot of water, 15 to 20 foot down if there's a thermocline. Exactly. If it hasn't, it just kind of depends on where, but it's not a science, Uncle Frank.
No.
You have to embrace the randomness.
You have to, because your locators are going to tell you if they're there, because you're going to see the bait fish suspending there, and you'll see the bass streaking through the bait or just underneath the bait. So you'll be able to see this on your locator fairly easily. So again, I'm going to look for structure. So if I have that gut, and let's say the defined creek channel is a little more to one side of the gut versus the other side, maybe there's a little high spot on the opposite side. Maybe it's a little flatter, then drops off. So here's what we'll do. Okay, so am I on? Is this whole thing on there?
Yep.
Okay, so this is a top view of our little pocket or little gut. Okay, so this spot right here is this spot right here. All right. So you can see how the bass and the bait are going to position. They're going to be the high spot that comes up, they're going to be on this, or they're going to be right where the last flat goes down into the river channel, and they're going to relate. Now, notice I don't have anything on the gradual nothing side, because that's not usually where they are. Because if the bait runs, they could run the bait up and pin them against these things. And so it's an easy ambush spot. And for the most part, they're still going to relate to some type of structure or another. Okay, so if this is flash mob time, so my boat position is going to be here, which would put me about right there.
Yeah, you're casting.
I'm casting
over nothing, but it's not nothing.
Right, 100%. It's not nothing.
It's uncomfortable if you are used to flipping and pitching laydowns.
Correct.
Where you will be. Exactly.
So this indicates boat position. This indicates how I'm casting. It's not random. If somebody were to drive by you, they would look at you and go, look at that guy, he's casting nowhere. But the bass are really using this stuff. It's just they're using it deeper, okay? Traditionally, the most important time in this cold water period, bait. Yep. It's all about the bait fish. If there's no bait fish there, there's no bass there. I don't care what anybody tells you. This is heavily predicated on bait fish. The crazy enough thing about winter, and I've experienced this on numerous spotted bass lakes, in the dead of winter, I have caught them mega shallow.
You know why?
Because the bait was there.
No, it's because spotted bass are quirky.
They're they're a quirky few. But yeah, I have caught them very shallow in winter, like surprisingly shallow.
Haven't there been classics on Hartwell in early March where the water was in the 40s? I remember it. And all of a sudden, in the guts over those spots that and the guys are like, holy cow, they're schooling.
Right, and because that's bluebacks. That's
spotted bass.
Right. And they're prevalent on the blueback herring.
Okay.
So that's an important thing. That's why it's important to understand that what main forages on spotted bass fisheries, especially spotted bass fisheries. Again, lure is pretty much the same. Wintertime, we're typically flash mob junior, suspending jerk baits, but now I'm going to use deeper suspending jerk baits like the Perfect 10. I use a 24A bomber that I make suspend because it gets down to about 11, 12 feet. I can get it down deeper on 8-pound test line too. That's just a little trick. Swim baits with a jig head work this time of year. Traditionally, though, if I'm using a swim bait with a jig head in the wintertime, I'm using the lightest possible jig head I can get away with because I'm barely going to creep it. I'm just going to make it just so it's just moving around real slow and subtle like. And again, swim jig, my swim jig with the swim bait trailer. This is one of my go-to baits in the wintertime. So, that's pretty much from fall to winter on spotted bass. I kind of made it quick, and I wanted to focus on a few key structural elements. If you guys go back and watch the blueback herring show and the threadfin show and the gizzard shad show, this is going to make immense sense to you because you'll see how their similarities in that bait fish, how they're migrating. You'll see similarities in the bass, how they're following them. And remember that there's going to be overlap from resident fish to fish that do nothing but follow pelagics. So you're going to have an overlap. So certain times of the year, predicated on the bait fish movement, you're going to have even more fish in a smaller confined area. So that's pretty much my spotted bass gig.
Well, a couple generals. So let's say you're on a lake that has multiple species, like a table rock or any of those kind of East Coast, a Norman, a Murray, a Hartwell, or anything like that. You're going to have spotted bass distributed throughout the system. But in my experience, if I'm going out and I want to target spots, which I do, I'm typically going to start at the lower end of the lake. It's going to be deeper. It's going to be clearer. Yeah. It's going to have more structural elements that the spotted bass relate to. It's just they like that habitat. And in my experience,
it's also the most stable part of the lake.
It's the most stable. It's going to have a bait fish population in it. So if I am wanting to target, I will put in as close to the dam as I can, and then I will run up the first major creek arm adjacent to that dam and look for what you just described.
Absolutely.
And typically you can run into some spots there and start, we've done a bunch of shows and you've done a bunch of shows that talk about it. Well, it's kind of hard when, like a largemouth, there's a bunch of different but the spotted bass, although they move and they follow the bait and stuff, there are certain things that they like the brush piles, like the clear water, like the adjacent to deep water. They suspend over certain things. They're always related to the bait. They're predictable, yet unpredictable. That doesn't make any sense, but you know what I mean?
Because they're
the
quirky.
Bait. Yeah, they are. They're quirky. They're very quirky. But that's just a general, and then apply. The other thing with spotted bass is I think you can really dial it in off the water on high percentage areas for spotted bass too with Google Earth, as far as identifying those, as far as identifying bluff ends, and then using your navionics, your mapping, to identify high percentage areas. And it seems to me like spotted bass, it's easier to drive to those areas and get bit than it is with the largemouth.
100%.
I feel like I get way more feedback from a spotted bass than I do with the largemouth, even though they can drive you nuts sometimes. They really like to suspend around areas where horizontal and vertical structure meet. A lot of times that's man-made. That's why you catch a lot of spotted basses on deep marina docks that go out over the deep water and the clear water, that have cross beams, that have poles that go down, locking dams, dam walls, break walls that have cables that come down on them. Horizontal, vertical structure brings the bait fish in, and those spotted bass, like you said, relate to them, not on them all the time, but around them.
Exactly. And that's part of the reason I like spotted bass fishing so much too, is because you can get rewarded in a hurry. If you make the right decision, you get rewarded. There's no messing around with it. When I was younger, the only spotted bass we had here was on the Ohio River. We had one lake that had them in it, but they weren't. It wasn't like a massive population, but we did have one lake that had them in it. And the Ohio River used to be a really good spotted bass fishery, and then it kind of cycled. Okay, where you started catching a mixed bag, largemouth and spotted. Then smallmouth started coming into the mix, and now, especially our northern pools, they're predominantly smallmouth pools. And our southern schools, our pools are predominantly largemouth now. The spotted bass they're still there, but they're not there in mass like they used to be when I was a kid. We used to go down there and just slaughter the spotted bass.
And listen, we need to put a little bit of a disclaimer on this, because when you do the smallmouth shows, you primarily talk about Great Lakes smallmouth, northern smallmouth, how they relate, natural lakes. Now there's different strains, like what works up north doesn't work on Texoma for those smallies, doesn't work on Wheeler for those in some instances, but they set up differently because of those elements. I think they're totally different strains. There are numerous different strains of spotted bass too. You have the Coosa spot, that Alabama spot, like on Lake Jordan or Lake Jordan, depending on where you're from. They get up there in the water willow. They behave remarkably similar to largemouth, and then they also behave like spotted bass too. But there's some that like thrive in the shallow, off-colored water, especially in the TVA. Then you've got more that's the same strain as the California. That's like kokanee, completely related to different bait fish out there. I don't think either of us have experience on California spots. But then we're talking about what primarily you're talking about, that Ozark region through that kind of Midwest to the east to the Carolinas, that type of spotted bass, not those freakish Coosa River chain spots Alabama River spots.
Although I did have such a good time fishing those river spots down there.
Oh, they're weird. They're bizarre, crazy looking thing. They're different fish.
They're longer. They're just, God, I mean, I had a lot of fun down there doing it. Back then, Bassmasters made some rule up about if we finished in the top 20, all the divisions had to go down there for a fish off, which kind of irritated me because I think I finished 4th or 5th in the points, and then I had to go fish off against the top 20 in every division, and I was smoking pissed. But and I wound up down there. I think I finished 17th down there, fishing those Coosa River spots, and it was a freak show. I wound up, the pattern that I got on was little sandbars and gravel bars, and I was throwing. I'll tell you exactly what I was throwing. I was throwing a Norman middle end and a crazy shad and a spinnerbait. And that was the deal. That was the deal. And I literally ran down the river, and every time I said, there should be fish over there, pull over, bam, bam, bam. It was unbelievable. Very predictable fish, ferocious animals. Those river spots fight like they have the will to live. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, it was a real lot of fun.
We'll show the difference here. So this is
You're laughing.
Well, it's comical what I'm going to show here. This is that California spot, which is the Coosa. That's Cody Meyer. Like we're not talking about those. We're not catching those.
No,
that exists one place on Earth.
And only one place on Earth.
So then this is what the Coosa spot looks like. Hold on,
It's a very long animal.
Yep. Here, let me show this. See how it's like long, lean, more bullet shaped, a little creamier color on it. Very defined lateral line on it. And then the typing tutor from my younger days is paying off.
And and those look like a lot like the Lake Norman spotted bass too.
Right. But then here is, that guy's caught a few, but see how that's a short, squat fish, lot smaller mouth, bigger gut on it, creamy colored belly. That's probably a table rock bass right there. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree with that.
So kind of three different, all spots, all behave similarly. Those Koosas are just a little bit different. What I want to do before we wrap things up, you've mentioned a bunch of baits. If someone is like, hey, I know there's a spotted bass lake, I've always kind of targeted the largemouth or whatever. I want to put together a little arsenal of spotted bass lures. I want you to run through it again and see if I've got it. So let's start with the moving baits. So crankbaits, it seems you've mentioned a couple times, big fan of the deep little N for spotted bass.
Right. Now I do deep crank them.
Right.
I do deep crank them. I mashed them on DD22s on
Right.
Hartwell.
But day
once
in and
in my
day
life.
out to get bites and numbers that applicable for a lot of
Right.
spotted bass fisheries, deep
So
little N.
what I'll do is a deep little N and a middle N.
Okay.
Okay. Um, as far as the crankbaits go, the top waters, that's pretty easy. I go Super Spook Juniors, Boyos, and Crazy Shads, because spotted bass love prop baits. By the way,
Okay.
they absolutely love prop baits. So I'll do that.
But if you had to pick one, it sounds like the boyo. I mean, even if you're catching those because a lot of times you don't have giant spots, but you can go catch a ton of them and have fun.
Right, but
And
I
take
can't.
your kids fishing.
I couldn't. In my heart and soul, I couldn't tell you to pick one. I
Okay.
would say if you had to do two, I would go Super Spook Junior and Boyo.
Okay.
If I had
Deep
to go
little
two,
N, middle N, Super Spook Junior, and boyo. So there's top, there's the crank.
right. So now, obviously, the obvious traditional stuff: shaky head, drop shot, football jig, regular jig. That stuff is, you guys have that.
Yep.
You can do your thing with that. As far as drop shot baits go, um, I'm only now starting to experiment with the FF minnow because they just came out. But I used to use a 4-inch finesse worm or a 6.5-inch finesse worm.
Simple.
Simple, real simple. Spinner baits. If I'm burning them over windy points, I'll go double willow or willow Colorado combo. War Eagles are all good. Obviously, the Covert series is good. But what I'll do there is I want to pick translucent skirts, representation skirts. I won't go with a heavy chartreuse white, pure chartreuse white. I'll keep it translucent. I might have chartreuse in the mix, but it's not going to be a hard skirt. I want them to get a glimpse of that bait, know it's alive, but not be able to tell exactly what it is.
Okay. And then the offshore stuff that you were talking, that's your umbrella, your Flash Mob Junior.
Yeah, and you can't forget spoons that time of year either, because if you're on 2D sonar and you see them directly under you, the spoon gets down there right now. You see
Slab
the whole
spoon, 7/8 ounce War Eagle or the Cordell.
Yeah, the CC spoon, three quarters on the CC, and then War Eagle 7/8. It goes right down to the business, and you just stop it right above them, stroke it up. You see the line on your locator, and you'll know in 2 seconds flat if they're aggressive on it.
And then the Scottsboro, the little bitty Scottsboro
The
on
little
a ball
bitty,
head.
yeah, the Scottsboro on a ball head, or even the FF minnow on a ball head. But like I said, I'm only now starting to experiment with the FF minnow, but the Scottsboro on a ball
That
head.
little 3-inch swim bait on a ball head. We've talked a lot about all this stuff. If you were to go out with one thing tied on to target spotted bass, is that what you have in your hand right there, what you're going with? If your back's against the wall and says you can only have one thing tied on this time of the year, are you going with that?
Yeah, if my back's against the wall, I'm going to have this on a ball head and this on a underspin.
Okay.
And I'm going to live on it. If I can only throw it, if that's the only bait I can throw, that's what I got.
And we can't forget jerk baits too.
No, and then jerk baits. I've caught so many spotted bass on jerk baits, I can't even begin to tell you how many. I don't even know. I really don't. It's just, they just can't handle that thing suspending over their head going crazy down there. I do well on the perfect 10s. I did well on the rogues. I've thrown jackals and done well on those. The old Excalibur TX3 is my all-time favorite, though. They don't make that bait anymore. It's discontinued. It comes in at about 3 1/8 inches long. It suspends beautifully. It has a really good, when you shake it, it has a really good side-to-side movement. That's one of my all-time favorites. The Bomber 24A, I modify it. That's another one of my favorites because I can get that thing to do crazy stuff down there. So, I mean, I don't make it complicated, even though it might sound complicated. I really don't. My jerkbait fishing is pretty simple.
Good stuff. Makes me want to go catch spotted bass.
I swear, dude, Frankie's out right now smallmouth fishing, and I'm so jealous. I'm like losing my mind right now.
I was trying to think, have there ever been any major tournaments won where it's like, I mean, has Table Rock, has there ever been a major tournament won on all spots on Table Rock, or has it always been like a mixed bag, or Bull Shoals or anything? Like,
ever since I could remember, it's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
It's not that, I don't know if you could, I think you could win it on all spots if you're on the right ones, but there's the smallmouth fishing in Table Rock's starting to get good. Mm-hmm. The largemouth fishing obviously is off the hook. Now, I've caught some enormous spotted bass on Table Rock. Mm-hmm. Enormous, like over 4 pounds. But it's hard to get
all the limits in multiple days. Now, Lake Norman, Lake Murray, Lake Hartwell, you can do it on spots. Traditionally, the winner has a bigger 1 or 2 big largemouth in his bag, but depending on the time of the year, the spots can play there. Right, like full out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And Ohio River, by God, if it's 12 inches, you don't care what species it is, it's going in the box.
Exactly. Anymore. Hey, we fish for big fish here.
I hear you. All right, well, this has been another edition of Day 4 with the man Frank Scalish and his new custom engraved BTL Uncle Frank mug. We had an appearance by Bama the Cat. We learned how to catch spotted bass over the next 3 or 4 months overall. A very productive Day 4 with Frank Scalish. All right, we'll be back live next week. See ya.
Out.